everyone, welcome back. Today we're going deep on Taiwan,
Right.
a place that's pretty much constantly in the headlines. You know, between China, the U.S., and Taiwan itself, it feels like every day there's something new going on.
Yeah.
But, we're going to try to get beyond those headlines.
Yeah.
Really unpack what's going on there, the history behind the tensions. And, you may have heard of TSMC, this major economic player.
Right.
We'll look at their role and just how the future of this one island could have effects all over the world.
Absolutely.
So, just looking at those images of Chinese military drills encircling Taiwan,
Right.
it's a pretty powerful statement, I think, don't you? What's China trying to do there?
Well, I think it really emphasizes China's stance
Yeah.
that Taiwan is a breakaway province and they intend to reunify it with the mainland, even if that means using force.
Right.
And that's a pretty strong stance.
And, for anyone who maybe hasn't been following this for years and years,
Yeah.
let's take a super quick history lesson here.
Yeah.
It goes back to the Chinese Civil War in the late 40s, when Mao Zedong and the communists won, established the People's Republic of China. The defeated nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek, they fled to Taiwan,
Right.
set up the Republic of China.
Right.
And it's that split that really underlies all this tension today.
And what complicates that whole situation is the U.S.'s role in it. The U.S. officially recognizes Beijing as the sole government of China, but they maintain these informal ties with Taiwan and act as a sort of protector.
Yeah.
So it's a real diplomatic tightrope that they're walking.
So beyond just history, why is Taiwan such a geopolitical hotspot? Like, what makes this little island so important to these superpowers?
Well, it's location, location, location. Taiwan sits right in the middle of vital shipping lanes. So it basically controls key choke points, like the Taiwan Strait, Miyako Strait, the Bashi Strait.
And just to put that into perspective for folks,
Sure.
we're talking about the impact on global trade. Most of the world's biggest container ships, carrying all sorts of stuff, from, electronics to car parts. Everything goes through those straits.
Everything.
And that makes them crucial.
Extremely crucial. And disrupting those routes could have a devastating impact on the world economy. We talked to Victor Gao, who's a former Chinese diplomat, and he really hammered home how critical those straits are for China to access the Pacific, for their Navy, and economically it's key for them.
Of course, now the U.S. also has its interests in the region, too.
Absolutely.
They have this first island chain strategy,
Right.
which involves all these military bases
Right.
in places like South Korea, Japan, the Philippines, basically trying to contain China's influence. It's like a line of defense stretching from Japan all the way down to the Philippines.
Yes.
And it's meant to control access to the Pacific. So, it's like this big game of geopolitical chess
It really is.
that's going on. We spoke to an expert from the Council on Foreign Relations, David Sachs, and he explained that this first island chain, as they call it, it's crucial for the U.S. to project power, protect their allies, and, keep an eye on things right there on China's doorstep.
And to kind of strengthen their position, the U.S. has been boosting military ties with Japan and the Philippines.
Right.
They're even getting access to bases near the Bashi Strait, which, as we discussed, is one of those key choke points.
Yeah.
And they've been doing a lot of joint military exercises, like when they sank that old Chinese-built ship.
Yeah, do you think that was a message to China?
Oh, absolutely. It was a very clear message, a show of force. The U.S. is committed to this region. However, China isn't just sitting back and watching, Victor Gao, who we mentioned before. He called the island chain strategy ludicrous and outdated. He accused the U.S. of, basically thinking like an empire.
Right.
He says China has every right to access the Pacific and that the U.S. is trying to stop them unfairly.
And they're backing that up, right? With their military spending, they unveiled that Fujian aircraft carrier.
Oh, that's right. The Fujian.
The newest and biggest one.
Yes. David Sachs believes it's a direct response to the U.S. island chain strategy.
Okay.
And its main goal seems to be preventing any U.S. intervention in the region, especially, if there was to be a conflict. So you can see Taiwan is right in the middle of this power struggle between the U.S. and China.
It really is.
But it's not just about military might. It's also about economics. And that's where Taiwan has a really unique advantage, a company called TSMC.
Okay, now TSMC, for folks who might not know,
Yeah.
that's Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. It's a leader globally in making microchips.
Right.
Those tiny little things that are in pretty much every electronic device.
Exactly. And not just any microchips. We're talking the most advanced semiconductors in the world.
Wow.
90% of them are made by TSMC. 90%.
That's huge.
It's incredible. Our smartphones, our computers, even military equipment, it all relies on these chips made in Taiwan.
So it's like Taiwan is holding the brains of the world in its hands.
It really is. And that's why the U.S. is so worried about what might happen if Taiwan was to, say, come under Chinese control. David Sachs actually suggested that if that were to happen, China could use TSMC to really reshape the entire region's economy, to their advantage, of course. He even said they could potentially turn the U.S. into just a supplier of raw materials while they dominate the manufacturing of all the high-tech stuff.
Right.
But, you know, Victor Gao, he argues that for China, it's not just about economics. Reunifying with Taiwan, he says, it's about national pride, about historical justice. To really understand this perspective, you have to go back to the century of humiliation. Now, that's a period in Chinese history, mid-19th and mid-20th century, and it had a huge impact on China's thinking. It was a time of, well, foreign invasions, internal conflicts. They lost territory. Yeah, a lot of turmoil. And during that time, in 1895, China lost Taiwan to Japan, which just added to this feeling of national humiliation.
Right.
Even though Taiwan was returned to China after World War II, then you had the Chinese Civil War, which led to that split we talked about before.
Right.
With the communists on the mainland and the nationalists in Taiwan.
And this is where the one China policy comes in, right?
Exactly. Beijing insists that there is only one China, and Taiwan is a part of it, even though they've never actually ruled it.
And pretty much the whole world follows this policy, including the U.S.
They don't recognize Taiwan as an independent country.
Now, the relationship between the U.S. and Taiwan has had its own twists and turns over time.
Oh, for sure.
After the Chinese Civil War.
Right.
The U.S. actually supported the nationalist government in Taiwan as the legitimate China. They even had troops stationed there.
They did. But then in the 1970s, the U.S. shifted towards closer relations with Beijing. They closed their embassy in Taiwan and pulled out the troops. But they kept up these informal ties and kept selling arms to the island. Which brings us to the present day and what's called strategic ambiguity.
Now, what does that actually mean in this context?
The strategic ambiguity is a diplomatic approach where the U.S. doesn't explicitly state what they'd do if China were to attack Taiwan.
Okay.
It's meant to deter both a Chinese invasion and also discourage Taiwan from formally declaring independence. It's all about maintaining this really delicate balance.
So they're keeping everyone guessing.
Exactly. It creates uncertainty, but the hope is it prevents things from escalating.
So we've covered China's view, the U.S.'s strategic interests, the history, the economics, the role of TSMC.
It's complex.
Well, what I really want to know is, what's it like to actually live in Taiwan? How are people dealing with this constant threat from China?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll dive into right after the break. It's really remarkable, actually. Taiwan has transformed itself over the years into a vibrant democracy. They hold free elections, they have a really strong free press, and they're committed to protecting civil liberties.
It's inspiring to see that even under pressure, like that they can build such a thriving democracy.
It really is, and they've even made some pretty progressive moves on social issues, like they were the first country in Asia to legalize same-sex marriage. And this year, they re-elected a progressive party that wants to keep things as they are with China, despite, you know, that constant threat of conflict.
Yeah, it's remarkable, but what's it actually like living there day to day for people? How are they coping with that pressure from China?
Oh, we talked to DW's correspondent, Yuchen Li, who's based in Taipei.
Okay.
And they gave us some really interesting insights.
Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
Well, Yuchen said that for a lot of Taiwanese people living under that threat from China, it's become almost normal, just part of life.
Wow. That's wild. That speaks to their resilience.
Yeah, it really does. But Yuchen also said there's this deep division within Taiwan about the best way to handle the situation. Some people think strong alliances with the U.S. and Japan are key to survival.
Yeah.
While others worry about getting caught in the middle of a conflict between superpowers.
Right. So it's that tension between wanting to be independent, but also not provoking China.
Exactly. It's a tough spot to be in.
Yeah.
Yuchen said there's a sense among many Taiwanese that they're pawns in this bigger game between the U.S. and China. They just want to decide their own future, you know, without anyone interfering.
That's a pretty universal desire, I think, wanting to control your own destiny.
Absolutely. And this brings us to the bigger ideological clash that Taiwan represents, because As a democracy with a capitalist economy, it aligns with U.S. worldview.
Right.
China, on the other hand, has its one-party system and a socialist market economy.
So Taiwan's become a symbol of that global struggle, democracy versus authoritarianism.
Exactly. It's a microcosm of these bigger forces at play in the 21st century.
Yeah, and for China's President Xi Jinping, reclaiming Taiwan isn't just about territory.
Right.
It's about national rejuvenation, erasing that century of humiliation we talked about.
Exactly.
And restoring China's place as a global power.
It's about righting those perceived historical wrongs.
And this is where David Sachs from the Council on Foreign Relations, he made an interesting comparison between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin.
Interesting.
He said both leaders see themselves as these transformative figures who are going to reshape the world order.
So for them, Taiwan's not just a piece of land. It's a key part of their vision for a new world order.
Yeah, and Victor Gao, he was very clear that he believes reunification with Taiwan is going to happen. He even warned the U.S. not to play with fire.
It's a strong statement for sure, but if the U.S. does back down, what message does that send to other democracies in the region?
That's the key question, right? Because for the U.S., supporting Taiwan isn't just about geopolitics. It's about supporting democracy and standing by your allies.
Absolutely. David Sachs warned that if Taiwan were to fall to China, it could have a domino effect. China might feel emboldened to go after other democracies like South Korea, Japan, or the Philippines.
Right, and those countries might start to doubt the U.S. would protect them.
Exactly. So the stakes are really high. What happens with Taiwan could shape whether the 21st century is about cooperation or about conflict.
It's a lot to think about. So much to consider. We've looked at Taiwan's strategic location, the impact of TSMC, all the history behind the tensions, and even what life is like for people there.
And it all ties back to that clash between democracy and authoritarianism. Taiwan's right at the center of this global power struggle between the U.S. and China.
So as we wrap this up, what's next for Taiwan? What does the future hold? Especially for folks out there who really follow this stuff. What are the consequences for everyone, really?
Yeah. What we've seen is that it's not simple. You've got historical baggage, economic interests, military moves, and the Taiwanese people, they just want to decide their own future.
Right. So with all that in mind, what do you see happening? What are the possibilities? What should we be watching for as things develop?
Well, that's the tough question, isn't it? Will things stay as they are now? Will China increase the pressure? Will the U.S. get more involved, even if it risks conflict? Or could there be some kind of peaceful solution where everyone gets what they want? There are a lot of options, and it all depends on what those key players do, what happens in the world, and just, unexpected events.
This is far from over. It's important to stay informed, talk about these issues, and think about what might happen.
Knowing what's going on, that's how we make sense of things.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Taiwan. If you found it useful, give a like and subscribe for more on global issues. Share this with anyone who wants to learn more, and until next time, keep exploring.